things. We still have one. Marissa's over here. Trish, we have Marissa's over here. So there are two things that I want to point your attention to. The first is on the very back of your bulletin, there is a listing of what our three core values are here at Grace. Christ-likeness, compassion, community. If you ever forget, you can just turn to your right. And you will see those values there. And what I have found is that something is of value if you invest energy and time and attention to it. But just to say something is of value and to put it on our walls doesn't necessarily mean anything. And so what I want you to think about over the course of this week and in the weeks to come is, what am I doing to deepen my belief that this is a core value that I hold? And what am I doing to deepen my commitment to Christ-likeness? What am I doing to deepen my commitment to community? What am I doing to deepen my commitment to compassion? On the back of your bulletin, there are suggestions of things you might consider. And we just bring this up from time to time because we don't just want in name only for those to be things that we say we value. We want them to be things that we actually do. So if you would consider this week choosing one of those core values and taking some specific action that helps you deepen your life in one of those areas, I think it would be a good thing for you and for us. So that's the first thing about the bulletin. The second thing I'll get to in just a moment. Now, last week we finished a series that we had been doing, a 10-week series in Ephesians called Finding Our Way. And I thought before we made our transition to the next series, which is going to be in the Psalms, called The Songs We Sing. This summer we're going to be in the book of Psalms in July and in August. I thought that we needed to build a bit of a bridge. I think that to just jump from one thing to the next thing to the next thing isn't always the best for us. So we're going to just pause this week and do some reflection, some introspection, and think about the current conditions of our soul. Okay, so I will begin with the confession to you this morning. Now they say that confessions are good for the soul, they're just bad for the reputation. So I'm going to risk my reputation in the hopes that it will be good for my soul. Here's my confession. Lately, the last month or so, I have found that I am living at a level or a pace that is not sustainable long term. And there are a variety of different reasons for why I feel that way, but it's true. And I've been here before, so it should be no surprise to me how to get out of this place. But knowing the right thing and doing it are sometimes two very different things. And so what I know from experience is that if I stay on this road, not only will I be exhausted and weary, but I will begin to do and say things that are incompatible with who it is that I am and want to be. And if I stay on the road long enough, living at the level or the pace that I currently am, it's going to long-term do damage to my soul. Why do I say that to you? I say that to you as a point of accountability so that at any point along the way, you can say to me, Vincent, how is your soul these days? Have you taken steps to deal with what you confessed this past Sunday? Not in a judgmental way, not in a condemning way, but in a way that tells me you care about me and you don't want me to be exhausted, burnt out, and living in a way that is incompatible with who I am and want to be. But I also say that because I believe that I'm not the only one who's living at a pace that is not sustainable long term. And this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to have a checkup. Each of us are going to look at and listen to our lives for a few moments and consider the current conditions of our own souls. Because there is nothing more valuable than your soul. Jesus said that. There's nothing more valuable than your soul. So the reason that you're going to need your bulletin is because there's an insert in there, and I want us to take a look at that as we get started this morning. so we're going to walk through this with some level of briskness, but what I would ask you to do is to consider taking this insert and putting it in a place where today or tomorrow or sometime this week, you actually sit with these questions and you answer them honestly. And as you answer these questions honestly, you consider what it is that you need to do to make adjustments in the areas that need adjustment. Consider this a warning as you're moving down the current road that you're on. It's a flag saying to you, if you answer them in a certain way, you need to slow down. You need to consider X or Y or Z. Okay? So let's just walk through these. There are 8 questions that I want you to consider. And it doesn't do you any good if you answer the question the way you want it to be. You have to answer the question the way that it is. Okay? There's always a gap between where we are and where we want to be. We're certainly the answer for where we are. Okay? So number 1. I am aware of a nagging sense that something is not quite right, but I don't seem to be able to take the time or make the effort to look into it. The truth is, I'm not even sure I know how. Now you see the continuum. It's always, often, sometimes, rarely, and never. That's going to be the answers for all of your questions, okay? So just initially, circle what you feel like is the best answer. And if you're not ready to do that, just think about it. Next, number 2. I find myself rushing from one thing to the next without time to really pay attention to what's going on in and around me. Number 3, I am tired, not just physically, but spiritually and emotionally. And I don't really know how to get rested. There were several days over the course of this last week where I got more than enough sleep, and when I woke up I was just tired, and that told me something. It told me that there was something inside of me that needed more attention than sleep. And this might be your situation too. Number 4, I'm aware of an underlying irritability and restlessness that's just beneath the surface of my life. For some of us, it might be not beneath the surface, but starting to come out. But I'm aware of this fact. Number 5, I find myself increasingly giving in to escapist behaviors, eating, mindless television viewing, substance abuse, shopping, spending, or escapist fantasies, dreaming about being somewhere else or having a different life. Number 6, I do not have time for attending to my human needs, for exercise, for eating right, for getting enough sleep, doctor's appointments and medical procedures, picking up dry cleaning, getting the car washed, or making home repairs. I just don't have time. Number 7, my spiritual practices have slipped, even though I know that practices such as solitude, prayer, personal reflection on Scripture, etc., are life-giving. I find that I don't have the time or the energy for them. And then finally, number 8, I feel isolated with no one to fully confide in and no one who fully understands my situation. Okay. Anybody else have a confession to make? So what I want you to do is I want you to think about that as we walk through this morning. And we look at what Jesus has to teach us about the state of our souls. And then sometime today, tomorrow, the next day, the next few days, I want you to really think about where you are in regards to answering these questions. There's a very small percentage of you in this room that will find that you're in a very good place, and your answers to these are encouraging to you. And if that is the case, then you should celebrate and give thanks to God because you're in a good place. Don't get lazy Continue to do what you're doing to care for your soul, and you will continue to be on the road to wellness. But then I think there's probably some other group of us who needs to pay attention to some things. And I hope that this morning will be just that. That it will be kind of a precautionary message for you to slow down and pay attention to the things that you most need to tend to. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16. I'm just going to read 3 verses in a passage that comes in what was the final night of Jesus with his friends as they're sharing the Passover meal and having discussions about a number of things. Peter has just finished kind of chastising Jesus, telling him that he doesn't need to go the route that Jesus has already told him he needs to walk down. And he says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." In other words, the spirit from which Peter was speaking to Jesus was from the enemy. And Jesus looked straight at him and confronted that spirit. And so now, after that confrontation, he gets to this place where he says to his disciples the following words. He says, "If any of you wants to be my follower," verse 24, "you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, but you lose your own soul? Is there anything worth more than your soul?" Now, there are 3 basic takeaways from just that little bit that I want to share with you and just elaborate on. The first thing that I would say that Jesus speaks to is that each of us has a soul. Did you know that? Were you aware of that fact, that you actually have a soul? Number 2, did you know that you can lose it? It seems very clear to me when he's speaking to his disciples that there's a very real danger as he speaks to this issue, that they can gain the world and lose their soul. He doesn't want them to do that. So you have a soul, you can lose it, and then third, that there's nothing more important than the current condition of your soul. Now, I don't know how well you are in touch with those 3 things, but those 3 things, according to Jesus in Matthew chapter 16, those 3 things are true. We have a soul, our soul can get lost, but there's nothing more important than our soul. And one of the things I want us to think about as we're moving forward is how we can know these things but be so out of touch with them. How is it possible that we know that our soul is supremely valuable and yet live as if it requires little to no care at all? It's an important, interesting thing to think about. Because probably most of the time we don't live in touch with the reality that we have a soul. We don't really think about that. If somebody were to ask you, you'd say, "Of course, yes, I have a soul." But then if somebody were to ask you, "Well, how's your soul doing?" What would you even say to somebody who asked you that question? Would you even know how to answer that question? I bet you don't get asked that very often. People will oftentimes pass you and say, "Hey, how you doing? How's it going?" I bet they don't ever say, "How's your soul?" And if they do, it's not very often. And if they do, you probably don't know how to answer the question. And so what I thought is, moving forward, that possibly one of the things that we need to think about getting started here this morning is what our soul actually is. Oh, why don't you turn to your neighbor in about 10 seconds or less and explain to them what your soul is? You have a good answer? Because in the Old Testament, the word soul is used 780 times. Nephesh. It literally means life. In Greek, it's called suke. It's used 103 times in the New Testament. And so, there's a lot of times when people ask us something and we think we know the answer, but when pressed, we don't really know how to answer the question. We're familiar with the term, we're familiar with the idea, but we don't really know what the answer is. And so I thought maybe we could do some clarification. So, for all intents and purposes, the soul is the deepest part of who we are. Okay? A lot of times it's used interchangeably in both the Old and the New Testament to actually speak as a synonym for one's personhood, for who they are as a person. It's the deepest aspect of who we are. It is, in a sense, our life center. And it is responsible for helping to integrate things like our body and our mind and our will into a single entity. Okay? When there's disintegration between our body, mind, and will, our soul is sick. And so what God designs is that because we're holistic beings, God has designed that those things would be in sync with one another. And what is responsible for bringing those things into sync is our soul. And so, if somebody were to ask you, describe for me the current condition of your soul, basically what they would be saying is, tell me how you really are. Tell me at the core of who you are, how you are. You know, when most people ask you how you're doing, you don't even think twice. You normally just say good because you don't want to get into it with them about all the things that you'd rather not talk about in a matter of 30 seconds or 45 seconds, don't you? How you doing? Good. Yeah, good. Fine, good. I'm asking you today not to answer that question. I'm asking you today to think about how you're really doing. Is there integration with your body and your mind and your spirit? Or is there some level of disintegration that's going on? It happens very easily, and therefore we need to be intentional as we think about how to care for the current conditions of our soul, lest we get to a place where we do damage. And Jesus says, even so far down the road, that we lose our soul. How many of you have ever gotten to a place, just honest confession is good for your soul. How many of you have ever gotten to a place where you felt like you were losing your soul? It's a terrible feeling, isn't it? Terrible. Jesus says to us, there is nothing more important than the current condition of our soul. So he says, well, what do you benefit if you spend all of your time, all of your days, and your energies, and your life pursuing things that if you gain, ultimately doesn't even leave you in a place of deep satisfaction? What if you have a lot of money and possessions? What if you make it to the top of the corporate ladder and you realize you've leaned it against the wrong building? What happens if you get everything you want and you spend all of your time and energies and you get to this place where you realize, I forgot to take care of my soul? Then what? Jesus says, what would it benefit you if you gained the whole world and yet still lost your own soul? And so, one of the things I want us to be thinking about this morning is, how am I doing really? How is the current condition of my soul? And if I believe, Jesus, that this is one of the most supremely important things, then what am I doing or not doing to make sure that I'm caring for it? If I were to ask you, how are you caring for your soul these days? What would you tell me? For those of you who are in a good place, you probably could tell me several things. But for those of you who are busy and rushed and pushed and pulled and pursuing other things that you have placed higher value on, you probably couldn't give me a concrete answer. And Jesus says, so if you get everything that you're pushing for, what would it benefit you if you ended up getting it? But in the process somewhere, you actually lost your soul. Our soul is the deepest thing about us. It is us. And it requires attention. It requires care. It's the hinge on which the quality and the health of our life depends. It's more than just what we think. It's more than just how we feel. It's the essence of all of those things integrated into one. It's who we are. To live at odds with how God made us will ultimately never lead us to a place where we will find deep deep satisfaction, deep goodness, deep meaning, no matter how much we possess. And that's why Jesus, in Matthew chapter 11, said to his disciples, who he could see were growing weary, he offered them an invitation. He said, "Come unto me, all who are weary and who carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I am humble and gentle of heart. Take and learn from me." In other words, I'm inviting you to a new way, a different way. A way that will lead you to life and health if you will follow it. Will you come? Following Jesus isn't just about what happens when you die. Following Jesus is about what happens while you live. It's about living a certain way. And if the way in which we live is incompatible with the way in which Christ calls us to, what happens is there's a disintegration of our soul. And no matter how much money we make, and no matter what promotions we get, and no matter how many friends we gather, and no matter how much we get what we want, if we don't take care of our soul, we're in very real danger of losing the very thing that Jesus says is in fact most important. So, how is it with your soul? Really? I hope sometime this week that you'll really have the time or take the time to ask one of your brothers or sisters here, but not just in passing, but with a deep, sincere desire to know the answer to the question and actually listen to them, how they're actually doing, what condition their soul is actually in. You know, if you catch it soon enough, you do less damage. But if you go down the road long enough, and you just bypass all the warning signs in your body and in your mind, you're restless, you're not sleeping, your body's starting to hurt, you're irritable, you're frustrated at every turn, you're just hardwired to react. See, there's signs in our lives all along the way that point us to the fact that our soul is not well. And if you listen to them and you tend to them, you don't have to go so far down the road before you do. And that's why living together in community is of help, hopefully. We don't judge each other for the fact that we've gone way down this road. We help each other find our way back. Because we're fellow travelers and we know what it's like to be lost. We know what it's like to have a sin-sick soul. So I just want to ask you, how's your soul? And are you living your life from the deepest places of joy, or are you just skimming it? You just trying to get through. You ever do that? You ever think, well, if I could just get through this week, this month, this year, this life, then fill in the blank. We do that, don't we? You know how many moments you miss along the way when you think like that? How many God moments you miss when you're pressing a fast forward button to get to some place that you think is going to be less stressful? You can live in any circumstance or situation without stress if you approach it in the right way. It's not the stuff in your life that induces stress. It's your response to the stuff in your life that induces stress. Are you living life or are you skimming it? Our soul is the deepest, most important part of who we are. So, we can live in one of two ways. This is just very base, bottom line. We can live in one of two ways. Number one, we can ignore the fact that we have a soul and we can exhaust ourselves and ultimately do damage to the thing that Jesus says is most important. Or we can acknowledge that we do have a soul, that it is extremely important, and that we prize and care for and renew it. Which one do you want to choose? That's simple, right? You don't want to ignore your soul. There's nobody in this room who would say, yeah, I don't want to go down that path. That seems like a good one. But it is so difficult to know the right thing and to do it still, isn't it? Why is that? Why is it so easy to know the right thing to do? It's so difficult yet to do it. I think it's because we don't yet fully believe that our soul is the most important thing about us. We don't really believe it. We sort of kind of think Vincent's telling the truth, maybe, that Jesus was kind of on to something there. But there's still so many other things we want. And sometimes those things we want are in competition with the things we need. And we have to distinguish and discern between the two. And what will happen is sometimes we say, well, I don't know how to discern the difference between what I want and what I need. You know what? If you listen to your life, you'll be surprised at the things you learn. It's just most of the time we don't take the time to listen to our lives. You know, if you're not sleeping well, there's probably a reason. You know that? If you're not sleeping well, there's probably a reason. If your body aches, there's probably a reason. If you're feeling irritable and reactive, feeling judgmental, there's probably something going on inside of you that you just need to tend to. If you're angry and ready to explode at whoever happens to come along, there's probably a reason for that. And that reason probably just didn't show up today. It's probably been with you for a while and you just haven't tended to it. But what would happen if you actually started to tend to those things? My belief is your soul would start to get well. And then no matter what came your way, you would be able to deal with it. Not that you would enjoy it or like it or think it good, but you would be able, in a calm and thoughtful fashion, be able to respond and not react. There are reasons that we become addicted to and obsessed with certain things. There's a reason why we long to be in control. There's a reason why we sit on the couch and watch mindless TV for hours after hours, or stay on the computer playing stupid video games until way into the early hours of the night, and then we wake up tired the next day and start our day and wonder why we're so tired and why we keep doing it night after night after night. You gotta just listen to your life for a little bit and ask yourself the question, why am I doing this? Is this leading me to a deeper, richer, fuller, truer life that is life? Or am I just trying to escape from something that I really need to pay attention to? Am I just looking to check out because I'm not so happy in where I am and how my life's going? All of us do this in a million different ways. If I didn't mention the ways in which you do it, just you know what you do when you're moving down a road that doesn't lead you towards hell. And if I did mention, I'm not just picking on you, I'm just thinking about the things that I do sometimes. Okay? How's your soul? Are you living life or are you skimming it? You know, the beautiful thing about what I've told you this morning is you ultimately get to choose which of those two kind of lives you want. There's so much in life you don't get to choose. There's so many things that are thrust on you that you don't have any capability or possibility of doing anything about. But the thing that you can do is you can choose the kind of life you want. You can choose the kind of person you want to be. And that being said, when you choose the kind of person you want to be, you choose the kind of actions that are compatible with that kind of person. Because there are certain things, if you want to be a certain kind of person, there are certain things you do and there are certain things you don't do. But when you're so busy you are and what you're about. And if you live at a pace that's not sustainable for the long term, what happens is you just lose touch with yourself. And you get to some place and you say, how in the world did I get here? How'd you get where you are? Just one decision, one choice, one step, one action at a time. That's how you get where you go. How do you get out of there? One decision, one choice, one step, one action at a time. You get to choose. You can live in one of two ways. You can highly value your soul, and you can care for it and nurture it, and do the things that are helpful in promoting life, or you can ignore and exhaust and do damage to it. At the end of the day, you get to choose. I know which one you would choose, but understand that doing the right thing and doing the right thing are not the same. And that in order to live this way, to prize and care for and renew your soul, you actually have to have a plan for that, and you have to execute that plan over and over and over and over. You will never drift into a state of having a healthy soul. You just won't. It won't just happen. You're not just going to wake up and stumble into health. You know, if you just wake up and have no plan and don't execute that plan, I'll tell you what will happen is, number one, your soul will be starved, it will be exhausted, it will be ignored, and you will do damage to it. You'll be in and out of relationships. The toys you get won't satisfy you. The life you have will be lacking in ways that I can't even begin to describe at the time. Just before we share communion, I ask you again, how is it with your soul? If you're not in the place that you want to be, you can do something about it. And if you don't really know what to do, but you want to do something, then I bet you probably know at least one person who can help you get on the road towards making changes that are necessary in caring for your soul. And I bet they would be super excited to help you find your way back to the place that you want to be, the person you want to be. Confession is good for the soul. Might be short-term bad for your reputation, but I think you can deal with it. Okay. By the way, feel free to ask me in the coming week, in the coming weeks, what I'm doing to take care of my soul. But for today, I wanted to offer you an honest confession of a person who has not been doing very well by caring for his soul. I hope that you will consider this fair warning for your own. Shall we pray? So what would it profit a man if he gained the whole world and lose his own soul? What would it profit a woman if she gained everything and yet her soul was still in such terrible shape? What is more important than our soul? Lord, I pray that you would use that assessment and these words to speak to us about where we are and where you want us to be, not from a place of condemnation, but from a place of help and hope. That we would be just a little more intentional in the way in which we care for ourselves, the deepest, truest part of who we are. Because that seems to be the most important thing to you and to us. As we continue in worship and receive communion, I ask God that you would meet us